So here I'm going to go ahead and just roughen a man's body quickly um, with the stomach. And this is much more practically how I use the uh, the anatomy that I was drawing in earlier, where I was really using more of um, a single line to try and cleanly define all the muscles. What I do when I'm actually drawing is I rough everything in like this with I just hold my pencil loosely and just get everything blocked in, um, very in a real sketch form, and then I'll erase it down with my knead eraser the way that I just did, and then I'll go ahead and start tightening my form. And so what I'm doing here is this is going to be a bit of a lighting exercise. So I, I'm just uh, blocking out the body in a very simple way. You can see that the line that I drew along that arm really shows the parts of the arm that are facing towards us and the parts that are turned away. So when I light it from the opposite side, the parts that are turned away, like the other side of that nose, will be dark, and the eyes will be dark, and the side of the cheekbone, and then that whole side of the arm will ultimately be dark. And you can see how easy it really can be actually to light a figure. It's all just a matter of um, knowing where your light source is. I find it very useful to actually draw down an arrow so you remember what direction you're working with. I don't recommend that you think in terms of a light source, like a single point light source, and then try to fan all your light out from it and make all the light. Uh, it gets way too complex. It's just really not worth the effort, the effect that you would ultimately get from that. You're much better off to decide that your lighting is coming from a certain angle, and then angle the lighting across the whole figure the same way. It's a much more effective way to work. You'll drive yourself a lot less crazy because the stomach turns under, and you can see that uh, I showed that with my center line. It's all away from the light, so it ends up catching the shadow. I find looking at people's samples and seeing how people that are starting out and learning tend to draw. Um, Shadow seems to be a bit of a difficult thing. I see instances where uh, shadow just becomes black shapes that are almost randomly placed around a figure. Um, and that's just a result of not having a light source and bearing that in mind. But then I see artists that actually do have an awareness of their light source and they're using that, but uh, they aren't completely consistent. And you really have to be aware that if you have your light coming from a certain direction, only the things that are turned away from that light source are going to be dark. So you never want to put a shadow on, let's say, a sphere. You would never put a shadow on one side of a sphere and then put a little dark area on the part of the sphere that's catching the light. And it's the same way. All of your muscles and all of your forms in the body are all simple shapes, really, just interconnected simple shapes. Um, like your chest is just a broad, flat, kind of rounded shape. Um, so one side of it would be dark, and the other side is going to be light. You don't want to put a big clunky shadow on the light side, and it's easy, I suppose, to make that kind of a mistake, but it's something you really have to be aware of at all times. That you're shadowing only the areas that are away from your light, and just be aware of that. And eventually, it really does become second nature, but I think you want to use shadowing to a certain effect, but it has to be consistent first and foremost. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to light this body from the same side, but from below. So now the tops of muscles and again the side that's turned away from us, or turned a little further away from us and certainly away from the light, is going to be dark. So again, I know the shapes of my muscles, uh, and I'm just making them dark where the light isn't. Um, for me, I have to admit that uplighting a figure is much more difficult, and it really shouldn't be. I mean, uh, the forms all are just simple shapes, and the lighting is the lighting, so it should be very easy to be able to just work out based on that where the lighting goes. But um, so much of it's repetition. I've been doing this for a long time, and you find shortcuts that work for you, and I guess those shortcuts just being the knowledge of where things go. It just, after a while, it kind of becomes second nature. So it's not second nature for me to be lighting a figure like this, and I think you can really actually see the difference in the way that I'm approaching this. The first one was much more effortless for me. This one is more difficult, um, and maybe something that I should do a little bit more, just to get a little stronger at it. But really, I think you can see the first one looks like much more natural lighting than this one here. This is it gives a very eerie, kind of almost spooky effect, and that can be very useful for some things. But you really can't just have um, Superman walk into a room and say something mundane and have that lighting. I mean, you can, but personally, I don't think it would be very effective. I feel like the lighting of any scene really, um, it plays a big role in how the scene is perceived, and you should always be aware of the way that your lighting affects the mood of your scene. A real heavy uh, shadowing lit from above can make everything seem uh, very intense and dramatic, and an uplight can things make things seem very unnatural. The reason it looks so unnatural to have something lit from below is we generally don't light things from below. Our lights are always above our head, be it the sun or lights in rooms. So it just gives things a bit of an unnatural light. Cool lighting also has that effect. That's something that would be more of a color issue, but more of a bluish cast light or a greenish cast light can make a figure seem very unnatural, as opposed to a warm light, which is what we get from the sun or from lights, in a house. So I'm just going ahead and roughing in another figure as quickly as I possibly can. These are probably not the strongest drawings I've ever created, but really, these are just here to serve a purpose. Um, and I don't want to take up too much time by refining every figure completely and um, making you wait half an hour watching me draw every figure. We just don't have that kind of time. So these are quickies. And now this figure is going to be lit in really, by far and away, the most common lighting that I would use, and the most common lighting that really most artists use. Portraitures use it, and that's just above and from the left. And so I'm just going ahead and um, shadowing muscles away from the light once again. Um, that broad chest shape is mostly lit, but you can see the corner on the right starts to turn away from the light. The head casts a shadow from the light. The nose casts a shadow in the same direction. Both eyes will be dark. They're both turned away. Um, and the head casts a shadow down onto the body. And now, again, my stomach will be fairly heavily shadowed just because it rounds down away from the light. So I'm just going to shadow that in pretty darkly. Uh, not something that's absolutely necessary for me to do. I can shadow under all of the muscles in the stomach. I don't need to actually make the whole upper area of the stomach dark, but um, I like doing that because I feel like it really turns the form nicely, and it looks dramatic to me. And so there it is. And if you notice on all three of those drawings, there is no shadowing whatsoever on the portions of the muscles that are close to the light. It's all about remaining consistent with your light source. Um, and if you can do that, you can make your figures look consistently properly lit. Here, what I'm going to do, because it's on my mind, is just draw in a few of the football shapes that I've been talking about, and you can see how I've got them interconnected. I've got three of them connected together, and that's how muscles always connect. And what you're doing, if I'm lighting them from the above left, is I'm lighting uh, the portions of the muscles that are turned away. So uh, you're creating kind of almost little wedges of shadow. Now with this arm here, what I really want to get across is that as the arm turns, if it were just a simple tube, you would have a band of shadow along the bottom if it were lit from above. And it would be as simple as that. But because it's not just a simple tube, but it has actual muscles that all have their own individual rounding, what I'm going to do with this one is start with very thin shadowing along the top and keep it really controlled, because I know if I go very thick with it along the top, the whole bottom would just have to be shadowed. The further down I go to the bottom of the arm, the thicker I get with the shadows, because the whole arm is actually rounding away from the light. And that's how you can take something that has a lot of complex little shapes on it and make it make it round as an overall shape with shadow.